She woke up before the sun had a chance to rise, the cold air in the small apartment making her pull the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders. Outside, the streets were quiet, except for the distant hum of a car or two. She knew the city would wake soon, and she needed to be ready. Today was just another day, another shift at the busy restaurant downtown, but inside her, there was a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, something would change. Her mornings were always rushed. She quickly dressed in her uniform, tying her hair back neatly, and grabbed a slice of bread and a cup of coffee, the only meal she had time for. Even in the smallest moments, she felt the rhythm of life around her. The ticking of the clock, the bubbling of the coffee, the distant chatter of neighbors. It was all a kind of music, though she barely had time to notice it most days. The restaurant was not far from her apartment, but the walk still gave her time to think. She imagined herself at a grand piano, playing a piece that could make anyone stop and listen. It was a dream she had held close for years, ever since her grandmother had taught her to play on a small, slightly out-of-tune piano in their old living room. Back then, the notes had sounded perfect in her hands. The world had seemed bigger, kinder, full of possibilities. But life had a way of pushing dreams aside. Bills needed to be paid, shifts needed to be worked, and music had to fit into stolen moments whenever she could manage. When she arrived at the restaurant, it was already buzzing. The morning crowd had started trickling in, and she had to put on a smile, even though her feet ached from the long walk and the nights of little sleep. She greeted the kitchen staff, exchanged quick jokes with a few regulars, and began setting tables. Every detail mattered. Napkins perfectly folded, glasses polished, chairs in the right place. She loved the rhythm of work, the way each movement had its own flow, but a part of her always longed for the music waiting in her mind. Her coworkers were used to her quiet presence. She didn't speak much about herself, keeping her personal life private. Most of them didn't know about the hours she spent at a second-hand piano tucked away in her small living room, practicing scales and melodies until her fingers ached. She didn't tell anyone because she feared disappointment. Dreams, she had learned, were delicate things, easy to crush if the wrong person said the wrong word. By mid-morning, the restaurant had grown busier. Lunch crowds arrived, their chatter filling the space with energy and noise. She moved from table to table, carrying plates, pouring drinks, and listening carefully to orders. It was exhausting work, but she did it with care. There was satisfaction in service, in seeing someone enjoy a meal she helped present. Yet even as she worked, she couldn't stop imagining the piano waiting somewhere, its keys calling her name. Sometimes, she tapped rhythms on the counter while taking orders, letting her fingers follow the music that lived in her mind. No one paid much attention, and that was fine. The music was hers. In the corner of the restaurant stood a piano, polished but often overlooked. It had been a fixture for years, only occasionally used when the restaurant held small events or when someone with talent happened to be present. Today, it sat quietly, as it usually did, its black and white keys glinting under the warm lights. She sometimes wondered what it would be like to play there in front of people who were not family or friends. The thought scared her and excited her in equal measure. What if she stumbled? What if she failed? And yet, what if this was her chance to show the world what she could do? The afternoon passed slowly, and the restaurant became a mix of clinking dishes and murmured conversations. She had a few moments to breathe near the piano as the crowd thinned, and she allowed herself a brief escape. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, letting the notes form softly, almost as if she were speaking a secret. The sound was delicate and sweet, filling the small space with a kind of quiet magic. No one else noticed, busy as they were with their meals, but she felt alive in a way that serving tables could never give her. Then, the door opened, and a group of people she had only seen from a distance entered the restaurant. They were well-dressed, carrying themselves with a sense of confidence that made her feel slightly out of place in her simple uniform. They were the elite of the city, the kind of guests who usually reserved private rooms or expensive dining experiences. She felt a flutter of nerves. The energy in the room shifted as they took their seats, laughter and conversation ringing through the space. She moved among them, taking orders with careful precision, noticing the way they looked around, assessing everything. One of them, a woman with a warm smile, glanced toward the piano. Her eyes seemed to linger, as if inviting someone to play. The moment was brief, but it stuck in her mind. She returned to her duties, but the thought of the piano lingered. Could this be the moment she had been waiting for, even if she didn't know it yet? As the lunch crowd thinned, the restaurant manager approached her with a smile. He mentioned that there was some downtime and hinted that if anyone wanted to try playing the piano, now would be a good moment. She felt her heart race. The opportunity was here, almost within reach, and fear and excitement battled inside her. She tried to keep her hands steady, reminding herself that she was just a waitress, that her place was behind the counter, not in front of a grand piano. But the pull was too strong. She found herself walking toward the piano, the polished wood cool beneath her fingertips. She took a deep breath, settled onto the bench, and let her hands find the keys. At first, the notes were soft, cautious, almost apologetic. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel the music, to let the rhythm of her dreams flow through her fingers. The sound grew stronger, richer, more confident. It was no longer just a practice in secret, it was a performance, even if only she knew it. Some of the guests glanced up, curious, while others were still engaged in conversation. But slowly, the music captured their attention. The melody was gentle yet commanding, full of emotion that seemed to speak to everyone in the room. It carried with it years of hidden practice, long nights, and quiet dedication. She played as if the piano had always been meant for her, as if every challenge in her life had led to this moment. The rhythm, the phrasing, the delicate pauses. It was all her, completely and utterly. A few guests whispered to each other, intrigued by the sound. The atmosphere changed subtly. The restaurant felt smaller, more intimate, even with the remaining diners scattered at their tables. She didn't look up. She couldn't. She was lost in the music, in the story she was telling without words. Each note was a piece of herself, laid bare for anyone willing to listen. And in that moment, she felt free in a way she had never felt before, as if the weight of the world had lifted, leaving only the purity of sound and feeling. When the piece ended, the silence that followed was palpable. It was a quiet, heavy pause, the kind that happens when people are caught off guard by something unexpectedly beautiful. She opened her eyes slowly, meeting a few astonished looks. Some guests were smiling, others seemed almost stunned, as if they had witnessed something extraordinary. The restaurant manager gave her a small nod of approval, and she felt a flush of pride, mixed with disbelief. She returned to her duties, trying to act casual, but inside, a storm of emotion swirled. Could this really be happening? Could her secret talent, something she had hidden and nurtured in the quiet of her apartment, suddenly be recognized? She felt the warmth of possibility, a glimpse of a future that had once seemed so distant. It was only the beginning, she realized, but it was enough to make her heart race and her spirit soar. As the evening approached, the restaurant continued its steady rhythm of service. She moved through it with new energy, noticing details she had never appreciated before. The way the light hit the polished tables, the laughter of friends enjoying a meal, the subtle nods of recognition from guests who had heard her music. She felt connected to the world around her in a way she had never felt when lost in her own thoughts. The piano, the music, and her own courage had opened a small door, and through it, something remarkable seemed possible. By the time her shift ended, she was exhausted but exhilarated. Walking back to her apartment, the city lights flickering against the dark sky, she replayed the afternoon in her mind. Each note, each glance, each fleeting moment of awe, it all felt like a small miracle. She knew this was not the end of her journey, but the beginning of something entirely new. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope, to dream, to imagine a life where her music could truly matter. The next day, she arrived at the restaurant with a mix of excitement and nervousness. The memory of her small performance the day before lingered in her mind, warming her even as her stomach twisted with uncertainty. She didn't know if anyone would remember, or if it would make any difference. but the thought that it might have changed something filled her with hope. The morning started slowly, with the usual routine of cleaning tables, polishing glasses, and greeting the first few customers with a smile. She moved through the restaurant efficiently, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She couldn't help but glance at the piano in the corner, as if it were calling her again. The keys gleamed under the lights, untouched but inviting. She wondered if today would bring another chance to share what had been locked inside her for so long. By mid-morning, the usual crowd had begun to trickle in. Some regulars recognized her from the day before, nodding with familiarity, while others were strangers who had no idea of her hidden talent. She took their orders with care, her hands moving smoothly, her mind still half with the music she wanted to play. She wondered if anyone from yesterday's audience had spoken about her, if anyone had been impressed enough to mention her name. As the lunch hour approached, a group of guests entered that immediately made her heart race. They were not the usual patrons. These were people with the kind of presence that filled a room. They wore elegant clothing, expensive watches, and carried themselves with confidence. It was clear they were part of the city's elite. She felt a flutter of nerves. Her uniform felt ordinary, her hands slightly shaky as she carried plates and poured drinks. But she reminded herself of the piano, of the melody that had once freed her soul, and tried to steady her breath. During the lunch service, she kept her focus on her work, but she noticed the guests frequently glancing toward the piano. One of them, a man with sharp eyes and a warm smile, leaned slightly toward the others and nodded, as if suggesting something. The energy in the room shifted, a subtle tension that made her heart beat faster. She continued taking orders, trying to stay composed, but she could feel the pull of the piano stronger than ever. After the main course had been served, the restaurant manager approached her quietly, his expression a mixture of amusement and encouragement. He mentioned that one of the guests had expressed curiosity about the piano and had asked if anyone would play. She felt her pulse quicken. This was no longer just a casual suggestion. It was an invitation, a chance that might not come again. She hesitated for a moment, the familiar fear creeping in, the voice in her head reminding her of the risks. But something stronger than fear urged her forward. She walked to the piano, each step echoing softly against the restaurant floor. The guests' eyes followed her, curious but patient, their anticipation almost tangible. She sat down, the bench solid beneath her, and placed her fingers on the keys. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment to gather courage. The first notes were quiet, tentative, as if testing the waters, feeling the piano's response beneath her fingertips. But soon, the melody found its voice, growing richer, stronger, and more confident. The room changed as she played. Conversations dwindled, plates paused mid-air, and eyes turned toward her. The music seemed to have a life of its own, moving through the space, connecting people she had never met, touching hearts in ways words never could. She played with all the emotion she had carried in silence for so long: joy, longing, frustration, and hope. Each note was a piece of her story, each chord a testament to her years of quiet practice and persistent dreaming. The elite guests leaned in, some closing their eyes, letting the music wash over them. They were captivated, caught off guard by the talent of someone they had initially seen only as a waitress. The contrast between her humble appearance and the skill she displayed made the performance even more remarkable. She played not for praise, but because it was a part of her, a voice that could not be silenced any longer. The piano became an extension of herself, and for a moment the restaurant ceased to be a restaurant. It became a stage, a sanctuary, a place where dreams and reality intertwined. As the final notes lingered, the room held its breath. Then came the applause, slow at first, hesitant, then building into a wave of appreciation and awe. Some guests approached her, eyes shining with admiration, words of praise tumbling out in hurried sentences. She tried to smile, to accept their compliments gracefully, but her hands were still tingling from the intensity of the performance, her heart racing with disbelief and joy. One of the guests, a woman with a keen eye for talent, spoke to the manager quietly. The manager glanced at her, and she could see the spark of recognition in his expression. Opportunities, whispers of invitations, suggestions of further performances. They floated in the air around her. She felt a mixture of excitement and overwhelm. This was what she had dreamed of in the quiet of her apartment, in the small hours of the night when the world was asleep. But now it was real, and she had to decide what to do with it. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. She continued serving, but the energy around her had shifted. The guests who had been so focused on their meals were now watching her, listening to every word, admiring her composure, and perhaps imagining the music she could create beyond the walls of the restaurant. She noticed small gestures of respect from her coworkers, subtle nods and smiles, as if they too sensed that something extraordinary had just occurred. By the time the evening arrived, the restaurant had returned to its usual rhythm, but the memory of the piano performance lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed it. She cleaned tables, wiped counters, and arranged chairs, her movements slower than usual as she replayed the afternoon in her mind. Each note, each chord, each fleeting glance from the guests reminded her that life could shift in a single moment. She had taken a risk, followed a spark of courage, and it had led to something beautiful. Walking home, the city lights twinkling against the dark sky, she felt a sense of possibility she hadn't experienced in years. The streets seemed alive, filled with opportunities, each one waiting for someone brave enough to take it. She thought about the piano in the restaurant, the music that had emerged from her fingertips, and the faces of the people who had listened with wonder. It was a moment that could change everything, a glimpse of a life that had once seemed out of reach. In her small apartment, she sat by the window, letting the city hum around her. She closed her eyes and imagined the piano, the audience, the applause. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt that the impossible was within reach. The music had spoken for her, opening a door that she had barely dared to knock on before. And she knew, deep in her heart, that this was only the beginning of a journey that could transform her life completely. The following evening, the restaurant was quiet at first, the usual lull before the dinner crowd arrived. She arrived early, a little anxious, carrying the same nervous excitement she had felt the day before. Something in the air told her that tonight could be different, that maybe the moment she had been waiting for was about to come. She had spent the day in small anticipation, thinking about the piano and the people who had watched her play with such awe. The memory of their faces fueled her, but also made her heart pound in anxious anticipation. She moved through her routine, greeting coworkers and checking the tables, but her mind kept wandering to the piano in the corner. The polished keys gleamed softly under the warm lights, and she felt a mixture of fear and longing. Could she do it again? Could she give another performance that would touch hearts the way she had imagined? She tried to steady herself, knowing that the chance could slip by if she hesitated too long. As the dinner crowd started to fill the tables, the same group of elite guests returned. They were talking quietly among themselves, but their eyes often glanced at the piano. She recognized some of them from the day before, and she sensed the curiosity and expectation in their expressions. It made her pulse quicken. She continued taking orders and serving drinks, all the while feeling a quiet tension building inside her. Every step she took toward them, every smile she gave, reminded her that the piano could once again become the bridge between her dreams and reality. When the main course had been served, a subtle pause settled over the restaurant. The elite guests exchanged quiet words and then looked toward her with anticipation. One of them, a man with a thoughtful expression, gestured lightly toward the piano. The invitation was clear, and it was in that instant she realized she could no longer hesitate. She nodded slightly to herself, took a deep breath, and walked toward the instrument, feeling the eyes of the room follow her with curiosity and expectation. She sat down at the bench, her hands hovering above the keys for a moment. The restaurant seemed to fade around her, the distant clatter of dishes and low chatter fading into a quiet hum. Then, slowly, she let her fingers touch the keys. The first notes were soft, almost fragile, like the opening of a door. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel the music fully, letting every emotion she had held inside pour into the melody. As the notes flowed, the room shifted. People who had been talking or looking around stopped, their attention drawn to the sound. The music was different tonight. It was bolder, more confident, yet carried the same gentle emotion. She played with her whole being, letting the piano become an extension of herself. Each chord was deliberate, each pause meaningful, as though the keys were speaking the words she could not express. The elite guests watched intently. Some leaned forward, caught up in the melody, their expressions changing with each phrase. They were mesmerized, the contrast between the young waitress and the profound music she created making the performance even more powerful. They whispered to one another in disbelief, trying to understand how someone so ordinary in appearance could produce something so extraordinary. Her fingers moved gracefully, following the rhythm of her heart, the melody rising and falling like a story unfolding. Her mind was a calm focus as she played. She didn't think about the applause, the recognition, or the eyes on her. She only thought about the music and the way it moved through the room, touching the hearts of those who listened. The notes carried stories of long nights spent practicing alone, of hope and longing, of dreams kept alive despite the hardships of life. Every chord resonated with the years of patience and quiet dedication she had poured into her passion. The piano allowed her to speak without words, to convey what she had always wanted others to feel. The restaurant seemed suspended in time. The sounds of plates, chairs, and voices faded completely, leaving only the music. She noticed subtle reactions from the guests. A slight tear in someone's eye, a smile forming slowly, a hand pressed lightly against the chest. It was as though the melody had entered their hearts and reminded them of something they had almost forgotten. She continued playing, letting the music swell and soften, rise and fall, telling a story without a single word. It was intimate and powerful, personal and universal at the same time. By the time she reached the final notes, there was a brief, breathtaking silence. It was the kind of silence that comes after something unexpectedly beautiful, a pause where everyone holds their breath, trying to absorb what they had just experienced. Then the applause erupted, stronger than anything she had imagined. It came from every corner of the restaurant, echoing off the walls, filling the space with warmth and admiration. She opened her eyes slowly, taking it all in, the astonished faces of the guests, the wide smiles, the soft claps of appreciation. Some of the elite guests approached her immediately, speaking words of praise and admiration. They were sincere, their excitement genuine, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest. Their compliments were not just about skill, but about the way the music had touched them, how it had moved something deep inside. She tried to smile and respond gracefully, but inside, her heart was racing with disbelief and joy. This was a moment she had only dreamed about, and now it was real. One of the guests, a woman with keen eyes, leaned slightly closer and whispered to the manager, who then looked at her with a mixture of pride and encouragement. The words floated in the air. Potential, opportunity, invitation. She could hardly comprehend it all. Life, she realized, could change in an instant, and all it took was courage to step forward. She had taken the risk, and it had led to something remarkable. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. She continued serving tables, but the energy had shifted. Guests were more attentive, co-workers looked at her with newfound respect, and even the manager seemed to watch her with a quiet pride. Every movement she made was filled with a subtle awareness that something had changed. The piano had not only given her a voice, but had also opened a door to possibilities she had barely dared to imagine. When her shift ended, she walked home through the city streets, the lights reflecting off the wet pavement from a recent rain. The world seemed different tonight, brighter and full of promise. She thought about the performance, the faces of the people who had listened, the applause that had filled the restaurant, and the sense of accomplishment that had wrapped around her like a warm blanket. It was a feeling she had never known before, one that filled her with both exhilaration and humility. In her apartment, she sat by the window, staring at the city that had once seemed so vast and indifferent. She thought about the piano, the music, and the courage it had taken to play in front of strangers who had never known her name. She realized that the music was more than just a skill. It was a bridge between her dreams and the world, a way to show who she truly was. The experience had changed her, not just in the eyes of others, but in the way she saw herself. She played a few soft notes on her small piano in the corner, letting the melody echo in the quiet room. Each note reminded her of the performance, of the guests' reactions, and of the possibility that life could hold more than she had ever imagined. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she felt ready to face it. The piano had given her a voice, and now, she knew she could use it to reach the world beyond her apartment walls, beyond the restaurant, and perhaps even beyond her own expectations. It was only the beginning, but she felt, for the first time in her life, that the path ahead was hers to shape. The morning after her unforgettable performance, she woke up with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The memory of the applause, the astonished faces, and the quiet awe of the guests was still vivid in her mind. She had never imagined that a simple afternoon at the restaurant could change everything. And yet it had. Her heart felt light, yet a part of her was tense with anticipation of what might come next. Her routine was the same as always, but this time there was a subtle difference. The walk to the restaurant felt different, almost as if the city had shifted slightly, just enough for her to notice. She thought about the piano, the sound of her own hands creating music that had made strangers stop and listen. The feeling of being recognized for something she loved and had nurtured quietly gave her a sense of validation that she had never experienced before. She wasn't just a waitress now. She was someone who could move people even for a brief moment with her music. When she arrived at the restaurant, the atmosphere felt slightly changed. The manager greeted her with a quiet nod, a hint of pride in his expression that hadn't been there before. Her coworkers noticed a shift too, offering subtle smiles and gestures that acknowledged her talent without words. It was a small recognition, but it meant the world. She set to work, serving breakfast and lunch, her movements precise and efficient, yet her mind kept wandering to the piano in the corner, calling her back. By mid-morning, the first guests began to arrive, and a few of them were from the group who had witnessed her performance the day before. They were clearly eager to return, and she could sense their curiosity and anticipation. Some whispered to each other, glancing toward her, while others simply smiled as she passed, their eyes sparkling with recognition. It was a strange feeling, being seen not just as a server, but as someone who had a story to tell, a talent to share. After the lunch rush began to thin, the manager approached her quietly. He mentioned that some guests had asked about her and wanted to hear her play again. Her heart leaped, and a rush of nervous energy coursed through her. She had imagined this moment countless times, in quiet hours late at night, but now it was real. She took a deep breath, reminded herself to stay calm, and walked toward the piano, feeling the familiar weight of anticipation and excitement. She sat down, letting her hands hover over the keys for a moment before pressing the first note. The melody was gentle at first, tentative, but as she found her rhythm, the notes grew stronger, more confident. She could feel the music flowing through her, filling the restaurant with emotion and beauty. Guests who had not witnessed her previous performances paused to listen, their attention captured by the sound. It was as if the piano had become a bridge, connecting her inner world with everyone around her. As she played, the reactions of the guests became more evident. Some closed their eyes, allowing themselves to be carried away by the music. Others leaned forward, mesmerized, as though they had been transported into a different place entirely. The energy in the room shifted subtly, a quiet reverence settling over the space. It was a performance not just of skill, but of emotion, of vulnerability, of the pure joy of expressing oneself fully. She realized that this was her gift, the way she could touch people without saying a word. When she finished, the applause was immediate and heartfelt. Some guests approached her with compliments, their voices filled with sincerity and awe. They spoke of invitations, opportunities, and the possibility of playing in other venues. She was overwhelmed, both by the attention and by the realization that her quiet life was beginning to change. The manager watched with a quiet smile, clearly proud, while her coworkers offered encouraging glances. It was a moment of recognition that went beyond praise. It was a validation of her dedication, her talent, and her dreams. Over the next few days, her life began to shift in small but meaningful ways. Guests returned to the restaurant, hoping for another chance to hear her play. Some left notes or small gifts, expressing admiration and support. One guest, a well-known music instructor, even asked if she would consider taking private lessons, offering to help her refine her skills and explore her potential. The idea was thrilling and daunting at the same time. She had spent years practicing alone, and now there were people offering to guide her, to help her reach heights she had only dreamed of. She also began to notice subtle changes in the way she saw herself. Where once she had felt hidden, unnoticed, and ordinary, she now carried a quiet confidence. The music had given her a voice, and the acknowledgement from others reminded her that her talent mattered. She moved through her daily tasks with a new sense of purpose, finding joy even in the mundane moments. Each plate she served, each table she cleaned, felt connected to something larger, a step on a path that was unfolding before her. The manager, noticing her growing confidence, gave her more opportunities to perform at the restaurant. Special evenings were planned where guests could enjoy her music along with their meals. The piano became more than a fixture. It was a centerpiece, a way to attract people, and she became an integral part of the restaurant's identity. She loved the music, but she also appreciated the chance to touch people's lives, to bring a sense of calm, beauty, and emotion into a busy and often chaotic world. Despite the growing attention, she remained humble. She remembered the quiet hours of practice, the moments of doubt, and the simple joy of playing for herself. Each performance was not about recognition or reward, but about expressing the feelings she carried inside. She had learned that music could be both personal and universal, a way to communicate with people she would never meet again, to leave a mark on hearts and minds through sound and emotion. As the weeks passed, opportunities began to grow beyond the restaurant. Invitations came for small recitals, local events, and even recordings. She considered each one carefully, balancing the excitement of new possibilities with the practical realities of her life. It was overwhelming at times, but she approached each opportunity with the same dedication and care she had always applied to her music. The world was beginning to notice her, and she was learning to navigate the attention with grace, humility, and determination. She also found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The years of quiet practice, the long shifts at the restaurant, the moments of doubt and perseverance, all of it had led to this turning point. She realized that her life had not been ordinary, even when it felt that way. Each challenge, each struggle, had shaped her, giving her the resilience and patience to seize this moment when it arrived. The piano had been waiting for her, and she had finally found the courage to play for the world. One evening, after a particularly successful performance at the restaurant, she walked home under the city lights, feeling a sense of fulfillment and purpose. The streets were alive, filled with possibilities, and she felt ready to explore them all. She knew that the journey was only beginning, and that there would be challenges ahead, but she also knew that she had the strength, talent, and determination to face whatever came next. In her apartment, she sat quietly by the window, her hands resting lightly on the keys of her small piano. She played a few soft notes, allowing the music to fill the room and echo the emotions of the past days. The melody was a reminder of how far she had come, of the recognition she had earned, and of the potential that lay ahead. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey, for the courage to take a risk, and for the chance to share her music with the world. She knew that life had changed forever. The applause, the opportunities, and the recognition were not the end. They were the beginning of a new chapter. The piano had opened a door, and she had stepped through, discovering a world where her talent, dedication, and passion could flourish. And as she played, she realized that the journey was not just about success, but about the joy of creating, the power of expression, and the beauty of sharing a part of herself with the world. Life had begun to change in ways she had never imagined. After the performances at the restaurant, invitations started to arrive from places she had only dreamed of playing. Small recitals, local music events, and even opportunities to perform for private gatherings of influential people gave her a sense that her life was opening in a way that felt both exciting and daunting. She approached each invitation with a mixture of anticipation and careful thought, knowing that each choice could shape the next chapter of her journey. Despite the excitement, she remained grounded. She continued her shifts at the restaurant, not because she had to, but because she loved the connection with people, the rhythm of service, and the familiarity of the space where her journey had first been noticed. She realized that the restaurant and the piano had been her training ground, a place where her talent could emerge quietly, away from pressure and expectation. Now, with attention coming from the outside world, she learned to balance her humble roots with the new possibilities that were opening up. Each performance beyond the restaurant strengthened her confidence. She discovered the unique thrill of playing for audiences who had come solely to hear her music, people who were genuinely interested in the stories she could tell with her hands and the piano. She learned to read the room, to sense the energy in the audience, and to let it guide her playing. Each note became more expressive, each melody more nuanced, and she found joy in knowing that her music could move people in ways she had once only dreamed of. She also encountered challenges she hadn't faced before. Traveling to new venues, performing under pressure, and managing invitations while maintaining her everyday life demanded focus and planning. Sometimes, she felt nervous, unsure if she could live up to the expectations. But she reminded herself of the courage it had taken to play in the restaurant for the first time, the courage that had changed everything. That memory became her anchor, a reminder that fear could be transformed into opportunity when met with determination and heart. Over time, she began to receive recognition beyond the local scene. Articles and mentions in small publications highlighted her talent and story, sharing how a humble waitress had captivated audiences with her piano performances. She felt a mixture of pride and humility. It was overwhelming to see her journey acknowledged, but she never let it change the essence of who she was. She remained someone who loved music for the joy it brought and for the way it could connect her to people, not for fame or reward. The music became a bridge in her life, connecting her past, present, and future. She thought often about her quiet apartment, the small piano she had practiced on for years, and the nights when no one was around to listen. Those memories reminded her that dedication, even when unseen, mattered deeply. Every challenge she had faced, every lonely hour of practice, had been preparation for the moment when she could finally share her talent with the world. Her personal life also shifted as she embraced the changes. She met musicians, teachers, and mentors who offered guidance, friendship, and opportunities to grow. Some of them had once seemed out of reach, people she admired from afar, but now they were part of her journey. She learned from them not only about music but also about resilience, humility, and the importance of staying true to one's passion. Each encounter enriched her understanding of the world and of herself. Despite the attention and opportunities, she remained rooted in the joy of music itself. She continued to explore melodies, experiment with rhythms, and compose small pieces that expressed her feelings. Music had become her language, a way to communicate with people she might never meet and to leave a mark on hearts through sound and emotion. She realized that her talent was not just about technical skill, but about the way it could touch lives, offer comfort, or spark inspiration. There were moments of quiet reflection when she thought about how far she had come. From a young girl learning on a small piano to a waitress playing for influential guests, and now to performing beyond the restaurant, her journey felt extraordinary. She felt gratitude for the people who had supported her, for the moments of courage that had led to opportunity, and for the inner strength that had kept her practicing, dreaming, and believing in herself. Her life became a balance of music, work, and personal growth. She still found comfort in her routines, in simple walks through the city, and in quiet evenings at home. Music had given her freedom, but she also valued the grounding moments that reminded her of where she came from. Each day was a blend of opportunity, discovery, and reflection. A tapestry woven with effort, courage, and joy. Performances began to carry deeper meaning for her. She noticed the subtle ways music affected people, the way a listener's eyes glistened, the way a hand rested lightly over a heart, the way silence fell in a room as everyone absorbed the beauty of a melody. These moments reminded her that her journey was about more than recognition. It was about the impact of music on human hearts and the connections it could create. One evening, after a performance in a small, elegant venue, she returned to her apartment and sat quietly at her piano. She played softly, letting her fingers follow the melodies that had been forming in her mind all day. The notes echoed through the room, filling it with warmth and calm. She reflected on the journey, on the moments of courage, and on the people who had believed in her. It was a quiet, peaceful time, a chance to reconnect with the love of music that had always been at the heart of her life. The recognition and opportunities continued to grow, but she never allowed them to overshadow the joy she found in music itself. She learned to perform with both confidence and humility, to accept praise graciously, and to share her talent generously. Each performance became a celebration, not just of her skill, but of the journey she had undertaken, the obstacles she had overcome, and the beauty of following a passion with dedication and heart. In her mind, she often returned to the restaurant, to the first time she had played in front of the elite guests. That moment had changed everything, opening doors she had never imagined. It reminded her that courage, even in small steps, could transform a life. She thought about the fear she had felt, the hesitation, and the ultimate decision to play anyway. That choice had led to a series of events that reshaped her world, proving that opportunities often come when we dare to embrace them. As time passed, she began to dream even bigger. She considered recording her own music, collaborating with other musicians, and exploring venues beyond her city. The possibilities seemed endless, and she approached each one with thoughtfulness and excitement. She had learned that talent alone was not enough. It required courage, dedication, and a willingness to step into the unknown. And she had all of those qualities, strengthened by the journey she had already taken. Through it all, she remained grateful for the simple joys, the feel of the keys beneath her fingers, the warmth of applause, the quiet moments of reflection, and the knowledge that her music could touch lives. She realized that the journey was not just about achieving success, but about living fully, embracing opportunities, and sharing the gifts that had been cultivated through years of patience and love. Her life had transformed in ways she had never imagined. From a quiet waitress playing in a small restaurant to a musician recognized for her talent, she had discovered a path that was both challenging and deeply rewarding. She understood that the moment at the piano, when she had first chosen to play for an audience, had set everything into motion. It had been a single decision that changed the trajectory of her life forever. And yet, in the midst of recognition and success, she remained grounded in the love of music itself. It was this love, pure and unwavering, that had carried her through every challenge, every fear, and every step of the journey. The music was her voice, her story, and her connection to the world. It reminded her of who she was, where she came from, and the limitless possibilities that awaited when courage met opportunity. In the quiet of her apartment, she played softly, the notes filling the space with warmth and reflection. She thought of the restaurant, the piano, and the people whose lives had intersected with hers in ways that had brought her to this point. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that a single moment of courage had opened a door to a life of passion, growth, and purpose. And as the final notes faded into silence, she smiled, knowing that her journey was just beginning, and that music would continue to guide her, inspire her, and connect her to the world in ways she had only begun to imagine.